My daughter stood in the center of the living room I had paid for, holding a glass of vintage champagne bought with my credit card, and told me I was a burden she could no longer afford to carry socially. She laughed as she said it. Beside her, my son-in-law Jason smirked, and my granddaughter Emma rolled her eyes at her phone, bored by the destruction of her grandfather heart. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply walked out the door, picked up my phone, and made one call that turned their $2 million lifestyle into a homeless shelter by midnight. But before we get to the eviction, you need to see the text message that started the war. I was folding a white linen shirt, the kind you buy specifically for a Tuscan summer, when my phone vibrated against the mahogany surface of my dresser. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that sliced through the quiet anticipation of the morning. I smoothed the fabric down with my hands. My knuckles were a bit swollen from arthritis, but steady. I was 71 years old, a retired architect who had spent 40 years designing foundations for skyscrapers. Yet I was about to discover that the foundation of my own life was built on quicksand. I checked the screen, expecting a confirmation about our driver for the airport, or perhaps a photo of my granddaughter Emma packing her bags. We were scheduled to fly out in 48 hours. Instead, I saw a text from Sarah, my only daughter. The preview message was long enough that I had to unlock the phone to read the whole thing. "Dad, I am so sorry to do this last minute, but you cannot come to Italy with us. Emma had a long talk with me this morning, and she says this trip needs to be strictly nuclear family only. She does not feel comfortable having a senior citizen tagging along for 2 weeks. It cramps her style, and honestly, Jason and I agree. We need space. I know you will understand. We will send you photos." I read the message once, then I read it again. The words did not seem to link together in a way that made sense. Banned. The word echoed in the empty hallway of my house. Nuclear family only. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. Just last week, I had sat in front of my computer screen with my reading glasses perched on my nose and authorized a wire transfer of $25,000 to the travel agency. I had booked the business class seats because Jason complained about his back. I had rented the villa outside Florence, the one with the infinity pool, and the private chef because Sarah said she needed to decompress. I was not just a participant in this vacation, I was the financier. I was the engine that made the machine run, and now the engine had been cut loose 2 days before takeoff. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the linen shirt still perfectly folded beside me. My hand hovered over the call button. I dialed Sarah. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed Jason. It rang twice and then was declined. I dialed Emma, my 19-year-old granddaughter, whom I had carried on my shoulders at Disney World, whom I had bought her first car for. She did not even decline the call, she just let it ring into the void. They were ghosting me. After taking my money, after letting me plan the itinerary, after letting me believe that for once I would not be eating dinner alone, they were cutting me out. A coldness started to spread from my chest outward. It was not sadness. Sadness is warm and heavy. This was cold and sharp. It was clarity. I looked at the suitcase. I looked at the passport sitting on the nightstand. I stood up. I needed to hear them say it. Text messages are cowardly. If they wanted to ban me from the family vacation, they were going to have to look me in the eyes and do it. I grabbed my car keys. I did not know it then, but I was leaving my home as a father, and I would return as a stranger. I drove to the house in the suburbs. It was a beautiful property, a sprawling colonial-style home with white pillars and a manicured lawn. I knew every inch of that house because I had drawn the blueprints myself. I knew the load-bearing walls and the wiring and the cost of the imported slate on the roof. I also knew that the mortgage payments were astronomical, and that for the last 3 years, I had been the one quietly paying them, because Jason was always in between opportunities. I parked my car down the street. I did not want to give them the chance to lock the doors and pretend they were not home. I walked up the driveway, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel. It was a warm afternoon. The windows were open to let in the breeze. As I approached the front porch, I heard laughter. It was loud, raucous laughter, the kind that comes from people who do not have a care in the world. I stopped. I moved off the path and stood beneath the large bay window of the living room. The shrubbery concealed me, but the acoustics were perfect. I heard Emma's voice first. It was high-pitched and fast. "Oh my God, you should have seen his texts trying to call me. He is so desperate. It is pathetic. I cannot believe you actually sent that, Mom. You are a savage." Then I heard Sarah, my daughter. Her voice was slurring slightly, likely from the afternoon wine she favored. "He will get over it, honey. He always does. He is just lonely and old. But seriously, can you imagine him trying to hike the Cinque Terre with us? He would probably break a hip and ruin the whole vibe. We need to look hot in Italy, not like we are running a nursing home." Jason chimed in, his voice deep and arrogant. "The best part is the money is already cleared. The agency said the villa is non-refundable. So we get the 4-bedroom place all to ourselves. I can finally stretch out without the old man asking me when I am going to get a job every 5 minutes." Laughter erupted again. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. My fingernails dug into my palms until I felt the skin break. Then Emma spoke again, and this was the sentence that killed the man I used to be. "So when we get back, are we doing it? Are we moving him out?" Sarah answered immediately. "Yes. The basement is basically finished. He spent like $130,000 on that renovation, right? It is nicer than our master bedroom. We will move him into a facility, tell him it is temporary for his health, and then you can take the basement, Emma. It will be perfect for your TikTok studio. The lighting down there is amazing now." I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to stone. 2 years ago, Sarah had come to me crying. She said she worried about me living alone in my townhouse. She said she wanted me close. She suggested I renovate their basement, turn it into a luxury in-law suite, so I could live out my final years surrounded by family. I had been so touched. I had sold some stocks. I had hired the best contractors. I had spent $130,000 creating a beautiful apartment in their lower level. I thought I was building a home. I was building a content studio for a teenager who thought I was pathetic. They were never going to let me live there. The plan was to take the renovation, take the value it added to the house, and then dump me in a facility. I looked at the house, my masterpiece, my gift to them. It looked like a monster, with its mouth open ready to swallow me whole. I did not storm in. I did not kick down the door. I was a man of structure, and right now I was assessing the structural damage. It was total. The building was condemned. I walked to the front door and opened it. It was unlocked. The laughter died instantly as I stepped into the foyer. Sarah dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the marble floor, sending shards of crystal and red liquid everywhere. Jason, who had been leaning back on the sofa with his feet on the coffee table, scrambled to sit up. Emma froze her phone still in her hand, likely recording something for her followers. "Dad," Frauscher stammered. Her face went pale, then flushed red. "You should have called. You scared us." I looked at the shattered glass. I looked at the packed suitcases lined up by the door. Designer luggage, Louis Vuitton, bought with the supplemental credit card I had given Emma for emergencies. "I got your text," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded foreign to me, like a voice coming from a radio in another room. Sarah stood up, smoothing her dress. She regained her composure quickly. She was always good at pivoting. "Right. The text. Look, Dad, we were just talking about that. It is really for the best. You know how easily you get tired. The heat in Italy this time of year is brutal. We did not want you to have a heat stroke. We are doing this for your health. Gaslighting. It is a terrible thing when strangers do it. When your own child does it, it feels like a violation of nature." I ignored her. I looked at Jason. You said the villa is non-refundable, I stated. Jason blinked. He looked at Sarah, then back at me. He tried to puff out his chest to look like the man of the house, but we both knew who paid for the roof over his head. Yeah, Bill, it is. So there is no point in you being dramatic. The money is spent. We might as well enjoy it. We will bring you back some wine. Or leather gloves. You like leather gloves. He spoke to me as if I were a child who had dropped his ice cream. And the basement, I asked, turning my gaze to Emma. My granddaughter, the influencer. She refused to meet my eyes. She stared at her screen, scrolling incessantly, as if the digital world could protect her from the reality in the room. What about it? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. I spent $130,000 on that basement, Sarah. You asked me to. You said it was so I could live here, so I could be with family. Sarah let out a sigh, a long, exaggerated sound of exhaustion. Dad, stop throwing numbers around. It is tacky. We are family. We do not keep score. That money was a gift. It was an investment in our future. And honestly, lately, you have been getting more difficult. Difficult, I repeated. Yes, difficult. You forget things. You repeat stories. Jason and I have been discussing it with a doctor. We think you are showing early signs of decline. The basement. It has stairs, Dad. It is a safety hazard. We found a lovely community just 30 minutes away. Assisted living. They have activities. It would be irresponsible of us to let you live in a basement when you need professional care. I stared at her. I am a man who still consults on architectural projects. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink every Sunday. I run 3 miles on the treadmill every morning. They were rewriting my reality. They were painting me as senile so they could justify stealing my life. Jason stood up and walked over to the kitchen island, grabbing a bottle of beer. Look, Bill, he said, popping the cap. You are ruining the vibe. We have a flight in 2 days. We are stressed. We do not have time for this guilt trip. Go home. We will talk about your living situation when we get back. Just let us have this vacation. We earned it. You earned it, I asked quietly. Yes, we earned it, Sarah snapped. Dealing with you is a full-time job. Raising Emma is hard work. Maintaining this house is stressful. We need a break. She gestured around the room. This is our house, Dad. And right now you are trespassing on our peace. Please leave. I looked at them one last time. I memorized the scene. Sarah with her wine-stained hem. Jason with his cheap beer and unearned arrogance. Emma with her face glowing from the light of her phone, completely indifferent to the grandfather she was planning to evict. They did not see a father or a grandfather standing there. They saw an ATM machine, a machine that was malfunctioning because it was asking questions instead of dispensing cash. I realized then that there was no conversation to be had. You cannot negotiate with parasites. You can only remove the host. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. Sarah slumped, visibly relieved. Okay, she repeated. Good. I knew you would be reasonable. Go home, Dad. Get some rest. We will send you a postcard. I turned around and walked to the door. Bye, Grandpa. Emma mumbled without looking up. I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I paid a landscaping crew $500 a month to maintain. I walked to my car. I got in. I did not slam the door. I started the engine and drove away. They thought I had accepted defeat. They thought I was going home to sit in my armchair and wait for their scraps of attention. They were wrong. I drove straight to the office of Thomas Blackwood, my attorney and oldest friend. It was 7 in the evening, but I knew he would be there. The drive took 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, I did not feel anger. I felt cold precision. I was an architect. When a building has a rotten foundation, you do not paint over the cracks. You do not try to shore it up with temporary beams. You bring in the wrecking ball. You demolish it. And you clear the site so you can build something clean. My family thought they were going to Italy. They thought they were getting a $2 million house. They thought they were getting rid of the old man. They had no idea that I was about to cancel their entire existence. I pulled into the parking lot of Blackwood & Associates. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back at me were hard. They were the eyes of a man who was done being a father and was ready to be a creditor. I walked into the building ready to draft the blueprints for their destruction. The vacation was over. The eviction was just beginning, and the $130,000 basement was about to become the most expensive mistake they ever made. I entered the lobby and nodded to the security guard who knew me by name. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington," he said. "Working late?" "Something like that," I replied. "Just doing some renovation work." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, I took out my phone and looked at the family group chat. Emma had just posted a photo of her passport with the caption, "Italy bound. No boomers allowed, #blessed." I smiled for the first time that day. Blessed indeed. The elevator dinged. I walked down the hall to Thomas' office. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by files. He looked up, surprised to see me. "Bill," he said, taking off his glasses. "I thought you were packing for Tuscany." I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I placed my phone on the desk, face up, so the screen was visible. "Change of plans." "Thomas?" He frowned, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "But it is going to be. I need you to pull the file on the LLC that holds the deed to the suburban house." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "The Harrington Holdings LLC." "Why? Because—" I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. "I need to serve an eviction notice. Tonight." "And Thomas," I added. "Yes, cancel the credit cards. All of them. The supplementary ones, the emergency ones. Mark them as stolen if you have to." Thomas leaned back, his eyes widening. "Bill, what happened?" I leaned forward. I realized I have been paying for a life that does not belong to me, and I am closing the account. I told him everything. I told him about the text, the eavesdropping, the basement, the nursing home plan. As I spoke, Thomas' expression went from confused to furious. He was a father too. He understood. When I finished, there was silence in the room. "That is monstrous," Thomas said softly. "It is business," I corrected him. "It is just business now." Thomas opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "You know, Bill, the house isn't technically theirs. You put it in the LLC for tax purposes. They signed a lease agreement 3 years ago. A symbolic lease. $1 a year." I nodded. I remembered. Sarah had laughed when she signed it, calling it unnecessary paperwork. She had never read the clauses. "Does the lease have a conduct clause?" I asked. Thomas clicked a few times, opening the document. He scanned the screen. Clause 14B. Tenancy may be terminated immediately for conduct detrimental to the property owner, or engaging in illegal activities, or harassment of the landlord. He looked up, a grim smile playing on his lips. Harassment of the landlord. "Does conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse count as harassment?" I asked. Thomas typed something rapidly. "I would say it certainly qualifies. Then draft the notice. I want it served tonight, while they are packing." Thomas hit print. The sound of the printer whirring to life was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. "What about the Italy trip?" Thomas asked, handing me the fresh, warm paper. I took the document. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. "I handled the travel agency on the way over," I said. I called the VIP line. I told them my card was compromised and to void all pending transactions immediately, including the final payment for the villa, which was due at midnight. So they have no house and no vacation, Thomas summarized. And no credit cards, I added. I stood up. I am going back there, Thomas. I want you to send a process server, but I want to be there when he arrives. I want to see their faces. Thomas stood up too. I will come with you. You might need a witness. And frankly, Bill, I wouldn't miss this for the world. We walked out of the office together. The sun had fully set now. The city lights were twinkling below us. I thought about Sarah, Jason, and Emma in their stolen house, laughing, drinking my wine, planning my demise. They thought I was frail. They thought I was losing my mind. They were about to find out that I was sharper than I had ever been. We got into my car. I drove back toward the suburbs. The drive was silent. When we pulled up to the house, the lights were blazing. I could see shadows moving in the upstairs windows. Packing. Preparing for their nuclear family getaway. I turned off the engine. Thomas opened his briefcase and handed me the eviction notice. Ready? He asked. I looked at the house one last time. I didn't see a home anymore. I saw a structure that needed to be raised. I opened the car door. Let's go say goodbye, I said. And then I walked up the driveway to burn it all down. The leather chair in Thomas Blackwood's office creaked as I leaned back, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. It was the only noise besides the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning and the scratching of Thomas' pen against a yellow legal pad. We were sitting on the top floor of the building overlooking the city skyline, a view that usually brought me peace. Tonight, however, the city lights looked like warning flares. On the mahogany desk between us lay a thick manila folder labeled Harrington Holdings, LLC. To anyone else, it was just a stack of paperwork. To me, it was the blueprint of my safety net. You know, Bill, Thomas said, looking up over the rim of his glasses, his voice low and serious. When you set this structure up 5 years ago, I thought you were being paranoid. You told me you wanted to protect the asset from liability. You said you wanted to ensure the property remained in the family bloodline regardless of marital disputes. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. It was a 20-year-old single malt, a drink for celebrations or disasters. I was not yet sure which one this was. I spent 40 years as an architect. Thomas Fisher replied, my voice steady but cold. You do not design a skyscraper assuming the weather will always be fair. You design it for the 100-year storm. You build in redundancies. You build in emergency exits. Thomas nodded slowly, tapping his finger on the document. Well, the storm is here. And you certainly built an exit. He opened the folder revealing the deed to the suburban house. It was not in Sarah's name. It was not in Jason's name. It was held entirely by the limited liability company of which I was the sole managing member. Underneath the deed was the lease agreement. It was a standard residential lease with a few very specific modifications I had drafted myself. I remembered the day Sarah signed it. She had been so busy planning the kitchen renovation, counting my money in her head, that she had barely glanced at the pages. She had laughed, calling it dad formality. She signed her name with a flourish right next to Jason Messy scrawl. They thought it was just paper. They did not realize it was a leash. Look at Clause 14, Section B, Thomas said, turning the page. It was highlighted in yellow. I leaned forward, reading the words I had written years ago. Revocation of tenancy. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this lease agreement immediately and without prior notice in the event of conduct by the tenant that demonstrates gross ingratitude, moral turpitude, or actions that threaten the emotional or physical well-being of the landlord. I looked up at Thomas. Gross ingratitude, I repeated. It is a broad term, Thomas admitted, a small smile playing on his lips. In a normal court, it might be hard to enforce. But this is not a normal lease. The rent is set at $1 per year. It is considered a gift lease. and gifts can be revoked when the conditions of the gift are violated. Banning the benefactor from a family vacation he paid for while plotting to put him in a nursing home, I would argue that constitutes gross ingratitude. But that is not all, is it? I asked. Thomas closed the LLC folder and opened a second, thinner file. This one was black. No bill. That is the legal side. This is the financial side. He slid a stack of credit card statements across the desk. I had given Jason a supplementary card 3 years ago. It was an emergency card linked to my primary account. I had told him it was for household repairs, medical emergencies, or things for Emma. I had set a limit, or so I thought. But looking at the numbers in front of me, I realized I had been asleep at the wheel. I trusted them, I whispered, picking up the first sheet. Trust is expensive, Thomas said softly. I scanned the columns. There were no charges for roof repairs. There were no charges for medical copays. Instead, I saw a litany of indulgence. DraftKings, $500. DraftKings, $200. The Golden Tee Golf Club, $400. Apple Store, $1,200. Liquor Barn, $300. The list went on and on. It was a hemorrhage of wealth. My wealth. I did the math in my head. In the last 6 months alone, Jason had spent over $15,000 on gambling gadgets and alcohol. But that is not the worst of it, Thomas said. I looked up. How can it be worse? Thomas pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a background check. You asked me to look into their financials before we served the eviction. You wanted to make sure they weren't destitute. Well, Bill, I have some news about Jason's job. Jason was a consultant. Or at least that is what he told us at every Thanksgiving dinner. He claimed to be consulting for logistics companies working on supply chain optimization. He always talked about big deals, pending contracts, and busy seasons. He hasn't worked in 6 months, Bill Thomas said. His contract with the logistics firm ended last November. He didn't quit. He was let go for cause. Something about misappropriation of expense accounts. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my fingers. He is unemployed, I asked. Unemployed and hiding it, Thomas confirmed. Every morning he leaves the house in a suit. He goes to a coffee shop or the library. He spends the day playing online poker on his phone using your credit card to buy chips. Then he comes home and complains about the stress of the corporate world. I closed my eyes. The image of Jason sitting in my living room drinking my beer, mocking me for being old, flashed through my mind. He was not just a parasite. He was a fraud. And Sarah, I asked, opening my eyes. Does she know? Thomas shrugged. She must suspect. Or maybe she chooses not to look. She is too busy spending the money you transfer into their joint account every month for expenses. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below was a grid of lights, cars moving in arteries of red and white. I had spent my life building structures that could withstand gravity and wind. I had tried to build a family structure that could withstand life, but I had built it on a fault line. I realized then that I wasn't just an ATM to them. I was the host organism. They were feeding on me, draining me dry, while laughing about how heavy I was to carry. The vacation ban wasn't just cruelty. It was a strategic move. They needed me out of the way so they could consolidate their control. They needed to move me into a home so they could take full possession of the assets without my oversight. They thought I was a senile old architect drawing lines on paper. They forgot that before you build, you have to excavate. You have to dig up the dirt and expose the bedrock. I turned back to Thomas. The house belongs to the LLC. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Correct, Thomas said. And I am the LLC, 100%. And Jason has been using a company credit card for unauthorized personal gambling and expenses, which technically constitutes corporate theft. Thomas nodded, his eyes gleaming. He knew where I was going. Yes, it does. I walked back to the desk and placed my hand flat on the files. Draft the eviction notice, Thomas. But not just for the eviction. I want to file a civil suit for the recovery of misappropriated funds. I want to garnish any future wages he might ever earn. And I want to cancel the lease effective immediately due to criminal activity on the premises. Thomas began typing rapidly. And Sarah, he asked without looking up. My daughter, the little girl I had pushed on the swings, the woman who had told me I cramped her style. She is complicit, I said. She signed the lease. She is on the joint account. She watched him spend my money, and she laughed while they planned to lock me away. I took a deep breath. Include her. Evict them both. And Emma, too. Emma. Thomas paused, his hands hovering over the keys. She is just 19, Bill. She is an adult, I said firmly. She is an adult who thinks it is acceptable to treat her grandfather like disposable trash. She wants to be an influencer. Well, she is about to influence her followers on what it looks like to be homeless. Thomas hit the enter key. The printer in the corner whirred to life. You are a scary man when you are angry, Bill, Thomas said. I am not angry, Thomas, I replied, buttoning my suit jacket. I am just correcting a structural failure. I picked up the fresh, warm pages from the printer. They were heavy with legal authority. This is the demolition order, I said. Thomas stood up and grabbed his briefcase. Then let's go execute it. We walked out of the office, leaving the empty whiskey glass on the desk. The time for contemplation was over. The time for forensic accounting was over. Now was the time for the wrecking ball. The automatic doors of the First National Bank slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming me into the air-conditioned silence of the lobby. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. To the rest of the world, it was just the start of another business day, but to me it felt like the opening ceremony of a funeral. I walked straight to the desk of Margaret, the senior account manager who had handled my finances for 20 years. She smiled when she saw me, a genuine warmth that felt jarring compared to the ice in my veins. Good morning, William, she said, adjusting her glasses. I was not expecting you today. Is everything all right with the transfers for the Italy trip? I sat down in the chair opposite her. It was comfortable, plush, and expensive, much like the life I had provided for my daughter. No, Margaret, I said, my voice flat. We need to make some changes. Immediate changes. I placed my platinum debit card on the desk. It made a sharp click against the glass surface. I need to cancel the supplementary cards issued to Sarah Harrington and Jason Miller. I want them reported as lost or stolen. Immediate deactivation. No grace period. No overrides. Margaret blinked, her professional smile faltering for a split second. Oh, is there a security concern? Did they lose them? I looked her in the eye. You could say that. They lost the privilege. Margaret nodded slowly, sensing the gravity in my tone. She began typing. The sound of her keystrokes was rhythmic and final. Click, click, click. Each keystroke was a severed artery of their lifestyle. While she worked, I took out my phone. I had the app for the travel agency open. The final payment for the Tuscan villa, $25,000, was pending. It was scheduled to clear at noon. I looked at the photos of the villa one last time. The stone terrace where I had imagined sipping wine with my daughter. The pool where I thought I would teach my granddaughter to appreciate the silence of the countryside. It was a beautiful fantasy. But fantasies are expensive. I tapped the cancel booking button. A warning popped up. Non-refundable deposit will be forfeited. I pressed confirm without a tremor in my hand. I would rather lose the deposit to a stranger than spend another dime on people who viewed me as disposable luggage. Margaret looked up. The cards are canceled, William. The system will decline any transaction attempted from this second forward. Is there anything else? Yes, I said. The joint checking account. The one I transfer $4,000 into every first of the month for their household expenses. I want to close it. Margaret stopped typing. William, if we close that account, any autopay bills linked to it will bounce. The mortgage, the utilities, the car payments. I know, I replied. Close it. Transfer the remaining balance to my personal savings. She did as I asked. I watched the screen as the balance went to zero. It was done. The financial umbilical cord was cut. I left the bank feeling lighter and yet heavier at the same time. It is a strange thing to bankrupt your own child, but I reminded myself that I was not ruining them. I was simply letting gravity take its course. For years I had been holding them up artificially. Now they were going to learn what it feels like to stand on their own feet. I drove back to my townhouse. It was quiet, peaceful. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my leather armchair by the window. I checked the time. It was 1 p.m. I knew their schedule. I knew that right now Sarah and Jason were at Il Forno, the most expensive Italian restaurant in the city. They liked to go there for lunch to celebrate. They were probably toasting to their upcoming trip, to their freedom from me, to the brilliant future they thought they had secured. They would be ordering the truffle pasta and the Barolo, believing that the magic plastic card in Jason's wallet would take care of everything, just like it always did. I took a sip of coffee and waited. At 1:45, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I stared at the screen. The photo that popped up was one I had taken years ago when she was graduating college. She looked so happy then, so proud. I wondered where that girl had gone. I wondered if she had ever really existed, or if I had just projected my hopes onto a stranger. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I cleared my throat, adopting a tone that was slightly wavering, slightly confused. I had to play the part they had written for me, so... "Hello, Dad." Sarah's voice was a shriek. It pierced my eardrum. She was not crying, she was furious. There was background noise, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of a busy restaurant. I could almost smell the humiliation coming through the receiver. "Hi, Sarah. Is everything okay?" I asked, feigning innocence. "No, everything is not okay. We are at Il Forno. Jason just tried to pay the bill, and the card was declined." "Declined, Dad. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is?" The waiter looked at us like we were criminals. I took a slow sip of coffee. "Declined. That is strange." "It is not strange. It is a disaster. Jason tried the other card, the one for emergencies, and that one didn't work either. We have a $400 bill here, Dad, and no way to pay it. Fix it. Call the bank right now and fix it." I leaned back in my chair. This was the moment. This was the test. "Oh dear," I said, letting my voice trail off. "You know, Sarah, I think I might have forgotten something." "Forgotten what?" She snapped. "I think I forgot to pay the credit card bill this month. You know how my memory is getting lately. Just like you said. I am getting old. Things just slip my mind." There was a silence on the other end. A stunned, angry silence. She didn't know how to react. She had spent months convincing everyone, including me, that I was losing my mental faculties. Now that I was confirming it, she was trapped in her own lie. "You forgot," she hissed. "How could you forget? You never forget money." "Well," I sighed. "I have been so stressed lately, with the trip and the packing and then, well, getting uninvited. It was very confusing for me, Sarah. I guess in all the confusion I just let the bills slide." "I am sorry, honey. You know how it is. The mind goes. Dad, you have to transfer money. Now. We are stuck here. The manager is coming over." I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "I don't think I can do that, Sarah. I don't have my reading glasses. I can't see the screen on my computer properly. And I wouldn't want to make a mistake and send it to the wrong place. You know, safety first. Isn't that what you always tell me? That I shouldn't be handling finances? If I am confused," I heard Jason's voice in the background, frantic and aggressive. "Give me the phone, Sarah. Let me talk to him." Sarah ignored him. Dad, stop playing around. This isn't funny. We need the money. I am not playing, Sarah, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. I am just an old man who cramps your style. I am sure you can figure it out. You are the nuclear family after all. You don't need a senior citizen to help you pay for lunch. But Dad, I hung up. I placed the phone on the table face down. My heart was beating fast, but not from fear, from adrenaline. It was the same feeling I used to get when I watched the final beam of steel being placed on a skyscraper. The structure was complete. The trap was sprung. They were sitting in a restaurant with a $400 bill and zero access to my funds. They would have to use their own money if they had any. Or they would have to call a friend. Or they would have to wash dishes. For the first time in her life, Sarah was facing a problem that Daddy wasn't going to fix. I walked to the kitchen and rinsed my coffee cup. As the water ran over my hands, I thought about the $130,000 I had sunk into their basement. I thought about the weekends I had spent supervising the contractors, making sure the insulation was perfect so Emma wouldn't get cold. I thought about the love I had poured into that foundation. And then I thought about the text message. Banned. I turned off the faucet. The water stopped. Let them panic. Let them sweat. Let them feel the humiliation of being insolvent in a room full of people they are trying to impress. This was just the appetizer. They had no idea that the main course was going to be an eviction notice served by a sheriff deputy while they were still trying to figure out how to pay for their pasta. I went back to the living room and picked up my book. I read the same paragraph 3 times without understanding a word. I wasn't reading. I was waiting. I was waiting for the realization to hit them. The realization that the golden goose hadn't just stopped laying eggs. The golden goose had just flown the coop and taken the nest with him. The phone rang again. This time it was Jason. I let it ring. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I blocked the number. I was done listening. It was time for them to start hearing the silence of an empty bank account. It was the loudest sound in the world. The silence in my living room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually brings peace, the quiet of a house well built and well maintained. But today it felt like the breathless hush before a tornado touches down. I sat in my armchair, the leather cool against my back, and stared at my phone. I had blocked Sarah. I had blocked Jason. I had cut off the money. I had launched the legal missiles. I should have felt triumphant, or at least safe. But a nagging instinct, a tremor in my gut, told me that the enemy was not done. They were desperate, and desperate people do not retreat. They escalate. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. I was proud of that. At 71, you look for signs of weakness in yourself, wondering if the ageists are right, wondering if you really are slipping. But my mind was clear. My resolve was iron. I was ready for the next move, or so I thought. My phone vibrated again. A single short buzz. It was not a call. It was a direct message on a social media app I rarely used, one I had only installed because 3 years ago my granddaughter Emma had insisted on it. She had wanted me to like her posts to boost her engagement. I remembered the day she set it up for me. She had been 16, smiling, smelling of vanilla perfume and innocence. "You have to support my brand, Grandpa," she had said. I had laughed and agreed, because what is a grandfather for if not to support the foolish dreams of his grandchildren? I unlocked the screen. The message was from Emma. I hesitated. A part of me, the part that remembered teaching her how to tie her shoes, wanted to believe she was reaching out to apologize. I wanted to believe that the toxicity of her parents had not yet fully infected her. I wanted to believe that the girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while we watched cartoons was still in there somewhere. I opened the message. There was no greeting, no apology, no plea for understanding. There was only a paragraph of text that turned my blood into ice water. Listen to me carefully, old man. I do not know what game you are playing with Mom and Dad, but you need to fix this right now. I am at the mall. My card got declined in front of my friends. Do you know how humiliating that is? Turn the cards back on. Transfer the money for the trip. If you don't, I am going to post a video. I have a lot of followers, Grandpa. I will tell them that the reason we didn't want you in Italy is because you make me uncomfortable. I will tell them you touch me weird. I will tell them you are a creep. You know how the internet works. Even if it is not true, they will destroy you. You will be the pervert architect who harasses his granddaughter. Fix the money by 5 p.m. or I hit upload. I read it. Then I read it again. I felt a physical blow to my chest as if someone had swung a sledgehammer into my ribs. I had to put the phone down on the coffee table because suddenly my hands were not steady anymore. They were shaking violently. This was not just disrespect. This was not just greed. This was evil. Pure distilled evil. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. I tried to find a logical place to file this information, but there was no drawer in my mind, for granddaughter threatens to falsely accuse me of abuse for money. I thought about the tuition checks. $40,000 a year for her private school, because Sarah said the public schools weren't good enough. I thought about the car sitting in their driveway, a brand new convertible I had bought for her 18th birthday, because she said she needed it for her image. I thought about the basement renovation, the $130,000 I had spent largely to give her a cool place to film her videos. I had funded every aspect of her life. I had paved her road with gold. And now she was threatening to destroy my reputation, my legacy, and my freedom because she couldn't buy a designer purse at the mall. The nausea rose in my throat. It was a visceral reaction to the death of love. Because that is what happened in that moment. The love I had for her, the unconditional grandfatherly love that had survived her teenage tantrums and her entitlement, it didn't just fade. It died. It was murdered by that text message. She was 19 years old. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the power of an accusation like that in today's world. She knew that even a whisper of impropriety could ruin a man, could strip him of his friends, his standing in the community, his dignity. She was weaponizing the very real suffering of actual victims to extort her grandfather. It was sociopathic. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the street. The world looked different now. Darker. Colder. I realized then that I had not been dealing with a spoiled child. I had been dealing with a monster in training. Sarah and Jason had raised her to value things over people, image over integrity. They had taught her that people were resources to be mined. And she had learned her lessons well. She had surpassed her teachers. I looked at the clock. It was 2:30. I had 2.5 hours before her deadline. She expected me to panic. She expected me to call her crying, begging her not to do it, opening the digital wallet to buy her silence. She was counting on my fear. She was counting on my shame. But she had forgotten who I was. I was a man who dealt in facts. I was a man who built things that stood up to scrutiny. I walked back to the table and picked up the phone. The shaking in my hands had stopped. It had been replaced by a cold, deadly calm. I did not reply. I did not engage. I took a screenshot of the message. I made sure her username was visible. I made sure the timestamp was clear. Then I opened my email. I attached the screenshot. I sent it to Thomas Blackwood, my attorney. I sent it to my own personal cloud storage. I sent a copy to a private folder on my laptop. I secured the evidence. Then I typed a text to Thomas. Check your email. Emma just threatened to blackmail me with false allegations of abuse if I don't pay her. I want this added to the file. I want a restraining order prepared. And Thomas, if she posts anything, I want a defamation suit filed so fast her head spins. I will spend every penny I have left to ensure she never has a platform again. I hit send. I sat back down. I looked at the photo of Emma on my mantle. It was from her prom. She looked beautiful and happy. I stood up, took the frame, and walked to the trash can in the kitchen. I dropped it in. The glass cracked as it hit the bottom. That was the final severing. She had given me a deadline. 5 p.m. She thought she was holding a gun to my head, but she didn't realize that she had just handed me the ammunition I needed to bury them all. I was no longer just evicting tenants. I was neutralizing a threat. I thought about the party they were planning for tonight. The Bon Voyage party. They were still going to hold it. I knew they were. They were too proud to cancel, too deluded to believe that the money was truly gone. They were probably maxing out emergency credit cards, borrowing cash, doing whatever they had to do to keep up appearances for one last night. They would be waiting for me to cave. They would be checking their bank accounts, expecting the balance to replenish, expecting Grandpa to fix it, because Grandpa always fixes it. Emma would be there holding her phone, waiting for the notification that the money had arrived, smirking at her victory. I imagined the look on her face when instead of money, she saw me. I imagined the look on her face when the police officer looked at the screenshot of her text message. I imagined the look on her face when she realized that she hadn't just lost her vacation. She had lost her victim. I went to my closet. I pushed aside the comfortable cardigans and the slacks I usually wore. I reached to the back and pulled out my best suit. It was charcoal gray, tailored Italian wool. I hadn't worn it since I accepted the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Architecture Guild. I put it on. I tied my tie with a perfect Windsor knot. I put on my cufflinks. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't a tired old grandfather. He was a force of nature. He was a man who had drawn lines in concrete and steel his whole life, and now he was drawing a line in the sand. I checked my watch. 3:00. I had a meeting with the sign company at 3:30. Then I had to meet the sheriff. I walked out of my house. The air was crisp. Emma wanted a reaction. She wanted a show. I was going to give her the performance of a lifetime. I got into my car and started the engine. The text message burned in my mind, not as a source of pain anymore, but as fuel. "Don't test me," she had written. I put the car in gear. Test accepted, Emma. Let's see who passes. The phone rang at 4:15. It was Sarah again. I had unblocked her number specifically for this moment, knowing that the silence would eventually force them to reach out, not with an apology, but with a demand. I sat in my car outside the sign shop, watching the technicians load a large, flat object covered in canvas into a van. It looked like a piece of art, but it was actually a declaration of war. I answered on the second ring. "Hello, Sarah?" "Dad?" Her voice was breathless, tight, with a manic energy that sounded like glass about to shatter. "I am so glad I got a hold of you. The bank is being ridiculous. They put a hold on everything. Jason had to use his alternate financing to get the catering sorted for tonight." Alternate financing. That was code for a payday loan with 300% interest. Jason had maxed out every legitimate line of credit he had years ago. If he was buying shrimp cocktails and Prosecco for 50 people, it was with blood money. They were digging a hole so deep they would see China before they saw daylight. I listened to her ramble. She did not ask about my health. She did not ask why I had hung up earlier. She simply plowed forward, fueled by the delusion that the party must go on. The Bon Voyage party. The social event of the season in their little cul-de-sac. They had invited everyone. The neighbors they competed with, the parents from Emma private school, even Jason old fraternity brothers. They needed this party to prove they were successful, to prove they were going to Italy in business class, to prove they didn't need me. "So, Dad," she continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming sickly sweet. "We were thinking." Since you are not coming to Italy, and since you are, well, having some memory issues, we thought it might be nice for you to come over tonight. I raised an eyebrow at my reflection in the rearview mirror. You want me to come to the party, Sarah? The party celebrating the trip I am banned from. Well, yes, but not inside. I waited. The silence stretched thin. See, the thing is, Dad, we have the Petersons coming. And the new neighbors, the ones who work in finance. It is going to be very high energy. Loud music. Lots of people. We don't want you to get overwhelmed or confused. And frankly, Jason is worried you might say something off. You know how you get when you are tired. You start talking about money or construction, and it just brings the mood down. I gripped the steering wheel. They wanted my presence, but only as a utility. So what are you asking, Sarah? We need someone to watch Buster. Buster was their golden retriever, a good dog, the only living thing in that house with a pure soul. We can't have him jumping on the guests, Sarah explained. And we can't lock him in the laundry room, he barks. So we were hoping, could you just hang out in the backyard with him? You know, throw the ball. Keep him quiet. You can use the back gate. You don't even have to come through the house, so you won't have to deal with the crowds. We will bring you out a plate of food. Maybe a burger. I stared at the dashboard. They were inviting me to my own house, the house I paid for, to be the help, to be the dog sitter, to enter through the service gate like a peasant while they drank my champagne in the living room. It was the perfect insult. It was the cherry on top of the sundae of disrespect they had been serving me for years. They wanted to hide me in the shadows of the garden I landscaped, so I wouldn't embarrass them while they celebrated spending my fortune. Any lingering doubt, any small flicker of guilt about what I was about to do was extinguished in that second. It was snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. Sure, Sarah, I said. My voice was smooth, architectural. I was building a facade. Really? You will do it? Of course. I would love to see Buster. He is the only one who is always happy to see me. Sarah laughed. It was a nervous relief-filled sound. Oh, Dad, you are a lifesaver. Okay, come around 7. Use the alley gate. And please, Dad, wear something casual. Don't wear a suit. We don't want people thinking you are working security or something. I looked down at my charcoal Italian wool suit, the silk tie, the cufflinks that caught the afternoon light. Don't worry, Sarah, I said. I will be dressed appropriately for the occasion. Great. See you then. Oh, and Dad, don't mention the credit card thing to anyone if you see them over the fence. It is just a glitch. We will sort it out Monday. Monday. Monday, they would be sleeping in a motel if they were lucky. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, letting the audacity of it wash over me. They were borrowing money from sharks to throw a party to impress people they didn't like in a house they didn't own, while asking the owner to sit in the dirt with the dog. It was almost impressive in its narcissism. I started the car. I had one more stop to make before the party. I had to pick up Thomas, and we had to meet the sheriff deputy who would be executing the writ of possession. I drove toward the precinct. The sun was beginning to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. I thought about the backyard. It was a beautiful space. I had designed the patio myself. I had chosen the flagstones. I had planted the hydrangeas that lined the fence. It was a perfect stage. Sarah wanted me in the back. She wanted me hidden. She didn't realize that by putting me in the yard, she was giving me the best view in the house. I would be able to see everything. The toasts, the lies, the desperate preening. And when the time came, I wouldn't be entering from the back gate. I would be walking right up the center stairs onto the patio I paid for. I pulled up to the curb where Thomas was waiting. He looked sharp in his navy suit, holding a leather briefcase that contained the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb. He got in and looked at me. "You look ready, Bill," he said. I checked my watch. 5:30. They want me to watch the dog, Thomas, I told him as I pulled into traffic. They want me to sit in the backyard and keep Buster quiet so I don't embarrass the guests. Thomas let out a low whistle. They really have no survival instinct, do they? None, I said. We drove in silence for a while. The city gave way to the suburbs, the houses getting larger, the lawns greener, the fences higher. It was a landscape of illusion. Behind every perfectly painted door was a mortgage, a secret, a struggle, but none quite like the one at 42 Oakwood Drive. We met the deputy at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the house. Officer Miller. He was a young man, serious-faced. He reviewed the paperwork Thomas handed him. The eviction notice, the restraining order against Emma based on her threat, the proof of ownership. This all looks in order, Mr. Harrington, the deputy said. You want us to move in at 8? 8:15, I corrected. Let them get a few drinks in. Let the party reach its peak. I want the maximum number of witnesses. The deputy nodded. We will be staging down the street. Call us when you are ready. I got back in the car with Thomas. We drove the final 2 blocks. I could see the house from down the street. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. Cars were already lining the curb. Expensive cars. Leased cars. I parked 3 houses down in a dark spot under an oak tree. I turned to Thomas. You wait here with the sign guys. Give me 10 minutes. I need to make an entrance. You aren't going in the back gate, are you? Thomas asked. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. No. I am going in the front door. I got out of the car. I smoothed my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I walked toward the house. I could hear the music. Jazz. Smooth, sophisticated jazz. I could hear the clink of glass. I could hear Sarah laugh that high-pitched fake laugh she used when she was trying too hard. I walked up the driveway. I didn't hide. I didn't skulk. I walked straight up the path to the front door. I didn't knock. I owned the place. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The cool air of the foyer hit me, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and impending disaster. I stepped inside. Honey, I'm home. I stood in the shadows of the oak tree 3 houses down from my own property, adjusting the cuffs of my charcoal suit. It was 8 o'clock. The air was cooling, but the heat radiating from the party down the street seemed to warm the night with a feverish, artificial energy. I could see the glow of the string lights I had installed 2 summers ago. I could hear the bass of the music. It was a celebration of a life that did not exist, funded by money that had already evaporated. Behind me, the white van of the sign company idled quietly. I had met the foreman, Mike, a burly man with paint-stained hands, at the staging area 10 minutes prior. He had shown me the placard. It was not a standard real estate sign. It was a custom job 4 feet by 4 feet printed on heavy-duty weather-resistant vinyl. For sale by owner. Immediate possession. The letters were bold and red. They screamed urgency. They screamed distress. It was the kind of sign you put up when you are liquidating a failed business. Do you want the post dug in deep? Mr. Harrington, Mike had asked me, his voice hushed as if we were plotting a heist. Deep enough to stand up to a storm, Mike, I had replied. And I want the spotlight aimed right at it. I want it visible from space. Now Mike and his crew were waiting for my signal. They were the artillery. Thomas stood by the hood of his car, checking his watch. The deputy officer Miller was in his cruiser, parked around the corner, lights off, engine running. This was it. The staging area. The calm before the demolition. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, but my chest felt hollow. A strange sensation washed over me, a wave of vertigo that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with memory. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I was not standing in the dark, planning an eviction. I was standing in the framework of that house 30 years ago. I saw Sarah as a little girl running through the sawdust of the unfinished living room, wearing a plastic hard hat I had bought her. I heard her laughing. Daddy built me a castle. I had built her a castle. I had built it with copper piping and slate roofing and unconditional love. I had reinforced the walls against the wind and the rain, but I had forgotten to reinforce them against entitlement. The memory was painful, a physical ache in the center of my chest. It tempted me. It whispered that I could still turn back. I could get in my car and drive away. I could let them have the party. I could let them have the house. I could retreat to my townhouse and fade away quietly, like the senile old man they wanted me to be. It would be easier. It would be less cruel. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a notification from the bank app. An attempted charge. Transaction declined Uber Eats. Amount $8,500. I stared at the screen. They were at a party catered with payday loan shrimp, and they were still trying to order takeout on my dime. They were insatiable. The memory of the little girl in the hard hat vanished. It was replaced by the image of the woman who had banned me from a vacation I paid for. It was replaced by the text message from my granddaughter threatening to destroy my name with lies. They had killed the father. They had killed the grandfather. All that was left standing in the dark was the landlord. I looked at Thomas. He was watching me closely, his face unreadable in the shadows. He knew what this was costing me. He knew that every step I took toward that house was a step away from the only family I had left. "Are you sure, Bill?" he asked softly. "We can still send the deputy in alone. You don't have to be the one to drop the hammer." I buttoned my jacket. The Italian wool felt like armor. "I am sure, Thomas. If I don't do this, they will never learn. They will spend the rest of their lives thinking the world owes them a living. I am not doing this to hurt them. I am doing this to wake them up." It was a lie, partly. I wanted to hurt them. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the humiliation I had felt when I read that text message. I wanted to shatter their delusions the way they had shattered my trust. I checked my tie in the reflection of the car window. Perfect knot. I turned to Mike, the sign foreman. "Give me 5 minutes inside," I said. "When you see the front door open and the porch light flicker twice, you move in. You plant that sign right in the center of the lawn, and you turn on the floodlight." Mike nodded. "You got it, boss." I turned to Officer Miller. "Officer, when the screaming starts, and it will start, come in. But not before. I want them to hear the eviction notice from me first. I want them to know exactly why this is happening." The deputy gave me a sharp nod. "Understood, sir. Just stay safe." Tensions can escalate quickly in domestic disputes. I touched the pocket where I kept the printed screenshot of Emma's blackmail threat. "I am counting on it," I murmured. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cut grass and expensive cologne. The night air was crisp. I walked away from the safety of the shadows. I walked past the neighbors' houses, past the manicured hedges and the silent driveways. I walked toward the noise. The music got louder. I could distinguish voices now. I heard Jason boasting about the villa in Florence. I heard Sarah laughing about how much packing she still had left to do. They were celebrating a future that had already been canceled. I reached the end of the driveway. I looked up at the house. My masterpiece. It looked beautiful in the moonlight. I felt a final pang of grief, not for the people inside, but for the time I had wasted building a sanctuary for people who would burn it down for insurance money. I hardened my heart. I turned the grief into concrete. I poured it into my spine so I could stand tall. I was no longer William Harrington, the doting father. I was William Harrington, the plaintiff. I walked up the path, my footsteps masked by the jazz music drifting from the open windows. I reached the front door. I did not hesitate. I did not knock. I turned the brass handle that I had selected from a catalog in 1995. It turned smoothly. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The air conditioning hit me cool and sterile. The smell of expensive perfume and cheap desperation hung in the air. I adjusted my cuffs one last time. It was time to bring down the house. The foyer smelled of lilies and expensive perfume, a cloying mixture that instantly coated the back of my throat. It was the scent of money being burned. I stepped onto the marble tiles I had selected and paid for 3 years ago, my dress shoes making a sharp, authoritative click that was lost beneath the din of the party. The house was vibrating. It was alive with the hum of conversation, the clinking of crystal, and the smooth bass of a jazz trio playing in the corner of the living room. I stood there for a moment, unobserved, a ghost haunting his own property. My eyes swept over the scene with the critical precision of an architect inspecting a site. It was a spectacle of excess. A tower of ice sculpted into the shape of the Leaning Tower of Pisa stood on the center island of the kitchen, dripping slowly onto a silver tray. Waiters in white coats weaved through the crowd, carrying platters of jumbo shrimp and caviar canapes. The guests were a sea of designer fabrics and polished smiles, the kind of people who judge your net worth by the watch on your wrist. I recognized a few faces. There were the neighbors who drove leased Mercedes. There were Jason's old fraternity brothers, men who had never quite outgrown their glory days, loud and red-faced from the open bar. And then I saw them. My family. The nuclear unit. Sarah was holding court near the fireplace, wearing a dress that likely cost more than my first car. She was radiant, glowing with the manic energy of someone who has successfully pulled off a heist. She was gesturing with a flute of champagne, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim as she recounted a story. I moved closer, stepping into the shadow of a large potted palm to listen. "We are flying private," she was saying, her voice pitched loud enough to be heard by the surrounding circle. "Well, practically private. Business class suites. You know how it is. We just needed to get away. The stress of the renovation was just too much. And honestly, this house has appreciated so much in value, we figured we deserved to celebrate the equity. $2 million, can you believe it?" The guests murmured their appreciation, their envy palpable. Jason was by the bar, leaning casually against the granite counter I had installed. He was laughing at something a man in a navy blazer said, clapping him on the back with the easy confidence of a man who has never had to pay a bill in his life. He looked the part of the successful consultant perfectly. No one would guess that his suit was bought with a maxed-out credit card, or that his job had evaporated 6 months ago. He was playing the role of the Lord of the Manor, and he was playing it well. And Emma, my granddaughter. She was by the ice sculpture, her phone held high, a ring light attached to it, blindingly bright. She was posing, pouting her lips, shifting her angles. "Bon voyage party vibes," she said to her screen, her voice dripping with artificial excitement. "Tuscany isn't ready for us. No bad energy allowed. Just family and luxury. No bad energy. Just the grandfather she had threatened to destroy an hour ago." I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has set the charges and is now simply walking toward the detonator. They were celebrating a victory that had already been annulled. They were dancing on a floor that was about to drop out from under them. I stepped out from the shadows. I did not head for the back door. I did not look for the dog. I walked straight into the center of the room. The crowd parted around me, not out of respect, but out of confusion. I was an anomaly. An older man in an impeccable charcoal suit, moving with a purpose that cut through the casual drift of the party. I saw heads turn. I saw whispers start behind hands. "Who is that?" someone asked. "Is that the father?" another whispered. I thought he was sick. I kept walking, my eyes fixed on the small raised platform where the jazz trio was playing. It was a perfect stage. Sarah spotted me when I was halfway across the room. I saw the color drain from her face instantly. Her smile faltered, then vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. She set her glass down on a side table, missing the coaster, and started moving toward me. She moved fast, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. She intercepted me near the piano. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the wool of my jacket. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Dad," she hissed through a clenched smile, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be in the back. With Buster." I looked down at her hand on my arm. I looked at it until she became uncomfortable and let go. "Buster is fine, Sarah," I said, my voice level. I decided I would rather mingle. It is my party after all, isn't it? I paid for it. Sarah flinched. She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "You are ruining everything. Look at you. You are wearing a suit. You look like you are going to a funeral. People are staring. Go to the kitchen, now. Jason is going to be furious." "Let him be furious," I said. "I am sure he can find a way to cope. Perhaps he can bet on it." Sarah's eyes widened. She realized then that something was wrong. The script had changed. I wasn't the confused, apologetic old man she had spoken to on the phone. I was something else. Something dangerous. "Dad, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Just go to the back. We can talk about this later. Please don't embarrass me. Not tonight." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. It wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of losing face. She didn't care if I was hurt or angry. She only cared that the neighbors might see a crack in her perfect facade. "I am not going to embarrass you, Sarah," I said softly. "The truth is not embarrassing. It is just the truth." I stepped around her. She tried to grab me again, but I moved faster than she expected. I walked up the 2 small steps onto the platform. The bass player looked at me surprised. I held out my hand for the microphone stand. He hesitated, then shrugged and stepped back. The music died down. A hush fell over the room. It started near the stage and rippled outward as people noticed the man in the charcoal suit standing above them. Jason looked up from the bar. He saw me. He dropped his drink. The glass shattered, but in the sudden silence it sounded like a gunshot. Emma lowered her phone, her mouth falling open. I adjusted the microphone. I tapped it once. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of the house I had built. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was strong, clear, resonant. It was the voice I used when presenting a project to a board of directors. Sarah was frozen at the foot of the stage. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she was trapped by her own social ambition. She couldn't cause a scene without admitting there was a scene to be caused. She was paralyzed by the very image she was trying to protect. Jason started pushing his way through the crowd, his face red and angry. "Bill, get down from there," he shouted, his voice slurring slightly. "You are drunk. Ignore him, everyone. He is confused." I looked at Jason. I held his gaze until he stopped moving. "I am not confused, Jason," I said into the microphone. "I have never been more clear." The crowd murmured. They sensed the tension. This wasn't a toast. This was a confrontation. "I am William Harrington," I continued, addressing the room. "Most of you know me as Sarah Father. Some of you know me as the architect who designed this house." I paused. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the neighbors, the friends, the strangers drinking my wine. I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for coming tonight. It is a beautiful party, isn't it? The shrimp, the champagne, the ice sculpture. It is a wonderful send-off. Sarah took a step forward, her hands clasped in a pleading gesture. "Dad, stop," she mouthed. But I didn't stop. I was just getting started. "We are here to celebrate a journey," I said. "A journey to Italy. A journey of a nuclear family. A journey that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of success and independence." I looked at Emma. She was pale, her phone clutched to her chest like a shield. "But before my family embarks, this new chapter, I thought it was important to clarify a few things about the foundation upon which this celebration is built. You see, as an architect, I have learned that if the foundation is rotten, the house will fall no matter how pretty the paint is. Jason was at the edge of the stage now. He reached for my leg, trying to pull me down. "That is enough, Bill," he growled. "Get down." I stepped back out of his reach. "I am not done, Jason," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "And since this is my house and since I paid for the microphone you are trying to silence me with, I suggest you let me finish." The room gasped. "My house." The words hung in the air. Sarah finally found her voice. "Dad, you are senile," she shrieked, turning to the guests with a wild, desperate smile. "He is having an episode. Please everyone just ignore him. He doesn't know what he is saying. He thinks he still owns the place. It is sad, really." I smiled. It was a cold smile. "Oh, I know exactly what I am saying, Sarah. And I think the guests might be interested to know. Owner of this $2 million property was asked to enter through the service gate tonight." I reached into my inside jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the eviction notice. But I didn't unfold it yet. I held it up. "You see," I continued, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone despite the amplification. "Tonight isn't just a bon voyage party. It is an open house." The guests looked at each other, confused. "Open house," someone whispered. "Yes," I said. "Because as of tonight, this property is under new management. Or rather, it is returning to its original management." I looked at Sarah. "You wanted a nuclear family vacation, Sarah. You wanted independence. You wanted to cut the dead weight." I unfolded the paper. "Well, congratulations. You got your wish." I signaled to the window where the floodlight from the sign company truck had just illuminated the front lawn. "Because the only thing leaving this house tonight is you." The floodlight outside snapped on with an audible hum, a harsh, brilliant white beam that cut through the darkness of the front lawn like a laser. It was aimed with surgical precision at the object Mike and his crew had just planted. Through the large bay windows, the guests could see it clearly. It was impossible to miss. A massive placard standing 4 feet tall, its red lettering glowing ominously against the night sky. "For sale by owner. Immediate possession. Harrington Holdings, LLC." The silence in the room shattered. It didn't break into applause or laughter, but into a low, confused rumble that quickly escalated into a roar of shock. People rushed to the windows, pressing their faces against the glass, their expensive drinks forgotten in their hands. They stared at the sign as if it were a tombstone for the party. Sarah spun around to look. Her eyes widened until I thought they might split. She stared at the words, "for sale," and for a moment, she stopped breathing. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup standing out like war paint on a corpse. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. "What did you do?" I spoke into the microphone, my voice calm, echoing over the rising panic in the room. "I did what any prudent landlord would do when his tenants violate the terms of their lease, Sarah. I put the property on the market." Jason lunged toward me again, but this time he was stopped not by my words, but by the sheer weight of the crowd turning against him. He was no longer the host. He was a fraud. "That is a lie," he shouted, his face purple with rage. "This is our house. We have the deed. He is lying. He gave it to us. It was a gift." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the deed. I held it up. It was the original, crisp and official, stamped with the seal of the county clerk. "Actually, Jason," I said, allowing a small cold smile to touch my lips, "the deed is right here. And if you look closely, or if you had ever bothered to read the documents you signed 3 years ago, you would see that the owner listed is not Jason Miller or Sarah Harrington. It is Harrington Holdings, LLC, a company of which I am the sole owner." I paused, letting the information sink in. I saw the guests exchanging looks. The neighbors who had envied them, the friends who had admired their success, they were all doing the mental math. They were realizing that the kingdom was made of cardboard. "You have been living here under a lease agreement," I continued, my voice steady. "A very generous lease agreement. $1 a year. But like all leases, it has conditions." I looked at Emma. She was standing by the ice sculpture, her face pale, her phone lowered. She knew. She knew exactly which condition had been violated. Clause 14, Section B. I recited from memory. "Conduct demonstrating gross ingratitude or hostility toward the landlord is grounds for immediate termination." Sarah turned back to me, her hands shaking. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You can't just sell our house. Where are we supposed to go? We have a life here. We have a reputation." "Your reputation," I said, my voice hardening, "ended the moment you decided to ban the man who pays your mortgage from his own property. Your reputation ended when you planned to put me in a home so you could steal my assets. Your reputation ended when you decided that I was nothing more than a wallet with a pulse." The crowd gasped. The whispers grew louder. "Steal his assets. Put him in a home." The accusations hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "This is insane," Sarah shrieked, looking around for support. "Can't you see? He is having a breakdown. He is making this up. He gave us this house. He is just mad because we didn't take him to Italy." "I didn't give you anything, Sarah," I corrected her. "I lent it to you. I lent you a lifestyle you couldn't afford. I lent you a dignity you didn't earn. And tonight, I am calling in the loan." I looked at the crowd. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening, ladies and gentlemen. But as the owner of this property, I must inform you that this party is unauthorized. The tenants have been served with an eviction notice effective immediately." I pointed to the door, where Thomas Blackwood was now standing, flanked by Officer Miller. "My attorney and the sheriff deputy are here to ensure the transition is orderly." Jason stared at the police officer. The fight went out of him. He slumped against the bar, looking like a deflated balloon. He knew the game was over. There was no bluffing a badge. But Sarah wasn't done. She was fighting for her survival. She rushed toward the guests, grabbing the arm of Mrs. Peterson, the neighborhood gossip. "Linda, tell him. Tell him how much work we put into this place. Tell him it is ours." Mrs. Peterson pulled her arm away, gently but firmly. She looked at Sarah with a mixture of pity and distaste. "Oh, honey," she said, smoothing her dress. "If the deed isn't in your name, it isn't your house. Everyone knows that." It was the final blow, the social verdict. Sarah stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of her pretensions. I walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted from me again, but this time there was fear in their eyes. They looked at me not as a kindly old man, but as a titan who had just pulled the sky down. I walked up to Sarah. I stood close enough that only she could hear me. "You wanted a nuclear family," I whispered. I gestured to the room, to the sign outside, to the police officer at the door. "This is what a nuclear explosion looks like." She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw her really see me. She saw the father she had betrayed. She saw the architect she had underestimated. "Dad." She whimpered a small broken sound. "I am not your dad right now, Sarah," I said, cold as the marble floor. "Right now I am just the landlord, and you are trespassing." The air in the room was suffocating, thick with the smell of expensive perfume turning sour on sweating skin. Sarah stood before me, her hands clutching the front of her designer dress, as if she could physically hold her unraveling life together. The guests were frozen, a tableau of shock and morbid curiosity. They were witnessing a social execution, and they could not look away. "But we are going to Italy," Sarah stammered, her voice rising in pitch, a desperate attempt to drown out the reality of the for sale sign burning on the lawn. "We have tickets. We have a villa. You can sell the house later, Dad, but we are leaving tomorrow. We are going to Florence. I looked at her with a pity that felt cold and distant, like looking at a stranger through a telescope. You are not going anywhere, Sarah, I said, my voice amplified by the microphone filling every corner of the room. I canceled the booking 3 hours ago. The villa is gone. The flights are voided. The $25,000 deposit I paid has been forfeited. A collective gasp swept through the room. You canceled it, she shrieked. You can't cancel it. It is our trip. It was my money, I corrected her. And since I am no longer part of the nuclear family, I saw no reason to subsidize its travel. I turned my gaze to Jason. He was leaning against the bar, his face a mask of sweaty terror. He knew what was coming next. He tried to shrink away to blend into the woodwork, but there was nowhere to hide. And speaking of subsidies, Jason, I continued, I think it is time we discussed your contribution to this household. Jason straightened up, trying to muster a shred of his usual arrogance. Don't you dare, Bill, he warned, pointing a shaking finger at me. Don't you dare talk about my business. Your business, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. You mean your consulting firm, the one that hasn't had a client in 6 months? The guests turned their eyes to Jason. The whispers started again. 6 months, I thought he was a partner. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the termination letter Thomas had obtained through a background check. It was a copy, but the letterhead was unmistakable. You were fired for cause last November, Jason, I said, reading from the paper. Misappropriation of funds, incompetence. Since then, you have spent your days playing online poker at the public library, funded entirely by the emergency credit card I gave you for your daughter's medical expenses. Liar. Jason shouted, his voice cracking. I am working on a startup. I am building something. You are building a debt, I said, cutting him off. A $15,000 gambling debt on my card alone. I tossed the paper onto the floor. It fluttered down, landing near his feet. You are not a provider, Jason. You are a dependent. And I am claiming you on my taxes as a loss. The room was silent now. Deadly silent. The image of the successful power couple was not just cracked, it was pulverized. They were exposed as frauds living on a pension they despised. But I wasn't finished. There was one more layer to peel back. The ugliest one. I turned to Emma. She was standing by the television, the massive 85-inch screen I had bought for her movie nights. She looked small now, stripped of her filters and her angles. She was clutching her phone to her chest, as if it contained her soul. In a way it did. And finally I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. We come to the reason I was banned from this vacation. The reason I am allegedly a creep. Emma's eyes went wide. She shook her head frantically, mouthing, No, Grandpa, please. But mercy is for those who ask for forgiveness, not for those who demand ransom. You all know my granddaughter Emma, I said, addressing the crowd. You follow her on social media. You like her pictures. You think she is a sweet girl living a charmed life. I took out my own phone. Well, this afternoon, Emma decided to send me a message. A message explaining exactly why I wasn't welcome in Italy. And since she is so fond of sharing her life with the public, I thought it only fair that I share this with you. I tapped the screen. I hit the cast button. The 85-inch television behind Emma flickered to life. It mirrored my phone screen. There, in high definition, 10 feet tall, was the text message. Listen to me carefully, old man. I will tell them you are a creep. I will tell them you touch me weird. Fix the money by 5 p.m. or I hit upload. The words hung there, glowing in the dim light of the party. A woman in the front row gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. A man near the back muttered, "Oh my God." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It wasn't shocked. It was horrified. It was the sound of a community realizing they had been harboring a monster. I looked at Emma. She was staring at the screen, her face white as a sheet. She wasn't an influencer anymore. She was a blackmailer exposed in her own living room. "That is your daughter Sarah," I said, pointing to the screen. "That is the nuclear family you wanted to protect. She threatened to destroy my reputation, what with a lie about abuse, because I cut off her credit card." Sarah looked at the screen, then at Emma. She looked sick. For a moment I thought she might faint. She saw the text. She saw the timestamp. She knew it was real. Emma finally broke. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She screamed. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, throwing her phone at me. It missed and skidded across the floor. "I hate you. I hope you die alone." The venom in her voice was pure, unfiltered hate. The guests recoiled. This wasn't a teenage tantrum. This was the true face of the girl they had admired. Jason snapped. The humiliation, the exposure, the alcohol, it all boiled over in a single second. He let out a roar, a guttural animal sound, and charged at the stage. "I will kill you!" he screamed. His fists clenched, his eyes bulging. He moved fast for a man who had spent 6 months sitting in a chair. He cleared the space between the bar and the stage in 3 strides. The guests screamed and scattered. Sarah covered her face. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't move, because I knew I wasn't alone. Just as Jason reached the steps ready to tear me apart, a blur of motion intercepted him. Officer Miller stepped out from the shadows near the door. He moved with the practiced efficiency of law enforcement. He grabbed Jason's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first onto the edge of the stage. The sound of Jason's face hitting the wood was a dull, heavy thud that echoed through the room. "Stay down!" the deputy shouted, pinning Jason to the floor. "Police! Stop fighting!" Jason struggled for a second, kicking his legs, but the fight was gone. He went limp, groaning in pain. I looked down at my son-in-law. He was pinned to the ground at my feet. His expensive suit gathering dust, his dignity gone. I looked up at the crowd. They were staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I straightened my tie. "This party is over," I said into the microphone. "Please clear the premises. The police need to process the scene." I placed the microphone back on the stand. It made a final click of finality. I walked down the steps, stepping over Jason's prone body without looking down. I walked past Sarah, who was sobbing silently, her hands covering her face. I walked past Emma, who was curled into a ball by the television, hiding from the world she had tried to manipulate. I walked to the door where Thomas was waiting. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "You did it, Bill," he said softly. I looked back at the room. The ruins of my generosity. "Yes," I said. "I did. Now get them out of my house." The click of the handcuffs was the final note of the jazz concert that never finished playing. It was a sharp, mechanical sound that signaled the end of the Harrington family dynasty. Jason was hauled to his feet by Officer Miller, his expensive suit now dusted with the grime of the floor he had just kissed. He didn't struggle anymore. He looked dazed, like a man waking up from a coma to find the world had burned down while he slept. Sarah stood frozen near the piano, her hands covering her mouth. She looked from her husband in cuffs to me, standing on the stage, and then to the guests who were watching with the morbid fascination of people witnessing a plane crash. "You can't arrest him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He is a father. He is stressed. Dad, tell them to stop." I looked at her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out necrotic tissue. "I didn't arrest him, Sarah," I said. "He arrested himself the moment he tried to assault the owner of the property." Officer Miller tightened his grip on Jason's arm. "Mr. Miller is being detained for assault and battery, the deputy announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. And as for the rest of you, under the terms of the emergency protective order granted by the judge based on the threats of extortion and violence made by Emma Miller, you are all being removed from the premises immediately. Removed, Sarah shrieked. But we live here. Not anymore, the deputy said firmly. The order states that due to the credible threat against Mr. Harrington, you are barred from coming within 500 feet of him or his property. Since Mr. Harrington is currently occupying his property, that means you have to go now. But where? Sarah looked around wildly. Where are we supposed to go? That is not my concern, ma'am, the deputy replied. You have 5 minutes to vacate before you are arrested for trespassing. 5 minutes. The reality hit them like a physical blow. Sarah's eyes darted to the stairs. My things, she gasped. My clothes. The luggage. We packed for Italy. The Louis Vuitton bags. She started to run toward the stairs, her heels clacking on the marble. Stop! Officer Miller barked. Sarah froze, one foot on the bottom step. You are not taking the luggage, the deputy said. What? Why? It is mine. I stepped forward. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at my daughter. Actually, Sarah, I said, my voice calm and reasoned, it is not yours. Those bags were purchased with the supplementary credit card I issued to Jason, a card he was not authorized to use for luxury goods. Therefore, those bags and everything inside them are evidence in the civil suit I am filing for misappropriation of funds. They stay here. Sarah's mouth opened and closed. She looked like she was drowning. But my jewelry, my laptop. Bought with stolen money, I countered. Collateral. It stays. Emma, who had been curled in a ball by the television, stood up. She looked small and terrified, the arrogance of the internet influencer completely stripped away. Grandpa, she whimpered. My phone. You have my phone. I looked at the device still lying on the floor where she had thrown it at me. The screen was cracked. I picked it up. This phone, I said, turning it over in my hands. The one you used to threaten me. The one you used to film your lies. I handed it to Thomas Blackwood. Evidence, I said. Emma let out a sob that sounded like a wounded animal. You are leaving with the clothes on your backs, I declared, my voice filling the room. That is what you own. That is what you earned. Everything else in this house, every stick of furniture, every thread of clothing, every electronic device was paid for by me. And since you have decided to bite the hand that feeds you, you will find that the hand has taken everything back. Officer Miller nodded to his partner, who had just entered the front door. Let's go, folks. Out. The walk to the door was a gauntlet of shame. Jason was led out first, his head hung low, avoiding the eyes of the fraternity brothers he had bragged to just an hour ago. They didn't look at him with sympathy. They looked at him with disgust. The illusion of the successful consultant was gone, replaced by the reality of a violent moocher. Sarah followed. She tried to hold her head up to salvage some shred of dignity, but it was impossible. She had to walk past Mrs. Peterson. She had to walk past the new neighbors from the finance sector. She had to walk past the people she had spent years trying to impress. I saw Mrs. Peterson turn her back as Sarah approached, pretending to examine a painting on the wall. It was a social death sentence. Sarah reached out a hand as if to touch her neighbor's arm, a silent plea for help, but Mrs. Peterson sidestepped her without a word. Sarah sobbed, a high-pitched sound of pure humiliation. Emma came last. She didn't look at anyone. She pulled the hood of her sweatshirt up, trying to hide her face, trying to disappear. But there was no hiding. The guests were watching. Some of them were even recording with their phones. The influencer was being influenced by reality, and the content was brutal. They reached the front door. The cool night air rushed in. I followed them to the threshold. I stood in the doorway, the master of the house, watching them step out onto the porch. The sign was still there, bathed in the harsh light of the floodlight. For sale. Sarah stopped on the walkway. She looked back at me. Her makeup was ruined, her dress was stained with tears. She looked like a refugee from a life she had destroyed. "Dad," she whispered one last time, "where are we going to sleep?" I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had loved more than my own life, and I felt nothing but a profound exhaustion. "You are the nuclear family, Sarah," I said, my voice soft but final. "Figure it out." I stepped back. I took the heavy brass handle of the door. "Goodbye, Sarah." I closed the door. The heavy thud of the latch engaging was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a weight being lifted. I turned around. The party was silent. The guests were staring at me. I adjusted my cuffs. "Please finish the shrimp," I said to the room. "It is paid for." Then I walked past them toward the kitchen to pour myself a drink in peace. While I sat in the quiet luxury of my reclaimed kitchen, pouring a glass of vintage scotch 3 miles away, the nuclear family was undergoing a meltdown in a room that cost $49 a night. They had ended up at the Starlight Motel, a roadside establishment known for its flickering neon sign and the smell of stale cigarettes embedded in the carpet. It was the only place that would take cash at 2 in the morning without a credit check. They were crammed into a single room with 2 double beds and a carpet that had seen better decades. The luggage, the designer bags bought with stolen money, were piled by the door like a barricade against the world. But the enemy was already inside. Jason was pacing, the small strip of floor between the beds, his tie loosened, his shirt stained with sweat. The alcohol from the party had worn off, leaving behind a jagged hangover and the terrifying clarity of a man who owes money to people who break legs. His phone was vibrating on the nightstand incessantly. It wasn't job offers. It was the loan sharks. He didn't answer. He couldn't. "You said he was senile," Jason shouted, kicking the leg of the bed. "You told me he was losing it. You said we just had to wait him out." "He didn't look senile tonight, Sarah. He looked like an executioner." Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing her party dress, which now looked ridiculous in the harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom. She had mascara running down her cheeks. "Don't you dare blame me," she screamed back, her voice cracking. "You are the one who hasn't worked in 6 months. You are the one who gambled away our safety net. If you had a job, we wouldn't be in this dump. We would have a lease in our own names." "I had a plan," Jason roared. "I was going to pay it back once we got control of the accounts." "But your father, that old psychopath, he ruined everything." "He didn't ruin it," Sarah spat. "Emma did." She turned her gaze to the corner of the room where Emma was huddled on the floor, plugged into the only available outlet. "It was your text," Sarah hissed, pointing a shaking finger at her daughter. "You had to threaten him. You had to push him. If you hadn't sent that message, we would still be in the house. We would still be going to Italy. You greedy little brat." Emma didn't look up. Her face was illuminated by the blue light of her phone screen, but she wasn't posting. She was reading. The video of the party had leaked. One of the guests, maybe Mrs. Peterson or the new finance neighbors, had recorded the entire confrontation. It was everywhere. It was on TikTok. It was on Twitter. It was trending. #Grandpa Snaps Back was the hashtag. And the comments were not kind. Emma was scrolling through thousands of them. "Look at that spoiled brat. She tried to blackmail her own grandfather. Jail. She belongs in jail. I went to school with her. She has always been a bully. Her influencer career was over before it began. She had gone viral, but not in the way she wanted. She was a pariah. Brands she had tagged in her aspirational posts were already blocking her. Her friends, the ones she tried so hard to impress, were deleting their photos with her. "I am getting death threats," Emma whispered, her voice hollow. "People are finding my address." "Well, the old address. They are saying I am a monster." "You are a monster," Jason snapped. "You destroyed this family." "I learned it from you," Emma screamed, throwing her phone onto the bed. "You guys taught me that money was the only thing that mattered. You taught me to use people. You used Grandpa for years. I just tried to do what you were doing." The room fell silent. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the smell of mold in the walls. They were trapped. Trapped by their debts, trapped by their lies, and trapped with each other. Someone banged on the wall from the next room. "Shut up in there," a voice yelled. "Some of us have to work in the morning." Sarah buried her face in her hands and began to sob. It wasn't the polite crying of a victim. It was the ugly, guttural crying of someone who realizes there is no safety net left. There was no basement renovation waiting for them. There was no Tuscan sun. There was only the neon light blinking outside the window, flashing red on and off, like a warning signal that had come too late. "Welcome to the real world," I thought, as I took a sip of my drink in the silence of my home. It is a cold place when you don't bring your own jacket. 3 days later, I was 30,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping a glass of vintage champagne that was chilled to perfection. The seat in first class lay fully flat, a cocoon of hand-stitched leather and privacy that cost more than my son-in-law's gambling habit for the month. I looked out the window at the endless carpet of clouds. Down below, in the gray reality of the suburbs, my family was likely fighting over who got to use the shower first in their motel room. Up here, the sun was shining. I had rebooked everything. I canceled the family villa, the one with the 4 bedrooms and the game room for Emma. Instead, I booked a suite at a historic boutique hotel in the hills of Chianti. Just for me. It was a property that valued silence and history over Wi-Fi speeds and ring lights. When I landed in Florence, the air smelled different. It smelled of roasted coffee and ancient stone. I rented a vintage convertible because at 71, why not? I was spending my children's inheritance, and I intended to enjoy every cent of it. Driving through the winding roads of Tuscany with the wind in my hair, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt lighter. The physical weight of the gravity was the same, but the spiritual weight, the crushing burden of being the patriarch, the provider, the safety net, was gone. I was just a man on vacation. I spent my mornings walking through museums, staring at Renaissance architecture, marveling at how structures built 500 years ago were still standing, because they were built with integrity. Unlike the life I had tried to build for Sarah. On the third afternoon, I was sitting on the terrace of a vineyard, watching the sun dip below the rolling hills, turning the grapevines into rows of liquid gold. I was sketching in my notebook, not blueprints for a house, but just drawing for the joy of it. "Is that the Duomo?" a voice asked. I looked up. A woman was standing at the edge of the terrace. She was about my age, with silver hair cut in a chic bob and intelligent, laughing eyes. She was holding a glass of red wine and wearing a linen scarf that caught the breeze. "It is," I said, closing the book. "Or at least my memory of it." "May I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair. "The view from my table is blocked by a honeymooning couple who are arguing about Instagram filters." I laughed. A genuine, deep laugh that came from the belly. "Please," I said, standing up to pull out the chair. "I am allergic to filter arguments myself." Her name was Alice. She was a retired art history professor from Chicago. A widow traveling alone because she said life was too short to wait for company. We talked for hours. We didn't talk about mortgages. We didn't talk about credit card debt. We didn't talk about the burden of ungrateful children. We talked about Brunelleschi's dome. We talked about the texture of the Chianti. We talked about the way the light hit the stone in the piazza at noon. It was the most refreshing conversation I had had in a decade. It was a conversation between equals, between adults who had lived and learned and survived. "You seem very peaceful," William Alice said as the stars began to come out over the vineyard, "like a man who has figured something out." I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the ruby liquid catch the candlelight. "I think I have, Alice," I replied. "I figured out that you can't build a future for people who are determined to tear it down. Sometimes you just have to stop construction and enjoy the view yourself." She clinked her glass against mine. The sound was clear and bell-like. "To enjoying the view," she said. "To freedom," I replied. And as I sat there under the Tuscan sky 4,000 miles away from the wreckage of 42 Oakwood Drive, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving the demolition. I was finally designing my own life. My phone vibrated against the wrought iron table, interrupting the chirping of the cicadas. It was Sarah. I looked at the screen for a long moment, watching the name flash. It was a name that used to bring me joy, but now only brought a dull ache of memory. I answered the call not out of obligation, but out of a need to close the final door. "Dad," she sobbed immediately. Her voice was thick with tears and exhaustion. "Please pick up. Oh, thank God. Dad, we are in a motel. It smells like smoke. The sheets are stained. Emma won't stop crying, and Jason he is broken. We have nowhere to go, please. We learned our lesson. We know we were wrong. Let us come back. We will live in the basement. We will sign anything you want. Just please save us." I listened to her plea. I listened to the desperation of a woman who had never been told no in 40 years. I waited for my heart to soften. I waited for the paternal instinct to kick in, the urge to fix it, to write a check, to smooth it over. But the instinct was gone. It had been replaced by the memory of a text message banning me from my own family. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm and steady against the warm Tuscan breeze. "You told me you wanted a nuclear family vacation. You told me I cramped your style. You told me you needed space to be yourselves. But we didn't mean this," she wailed. "We didn't mean we wanted to be homeless." "You wanted independence," I corrected her. "You wanted the authority of an adult without the responsibility. Now you have both. You are completely independent, Sarah. You have your husband. You have your daughter. You have your nuclear unit." "Dad, please." "I am busy, Sarah," I said, cutting her off. "I am in the middle of a very important appointment." "With who?" she asked, confused. "With a lawyer, no," I replied, looking out at the rolling hills bathed in golden light. "With myself. And I am finally enjoying the company. Good luck with the nuclear family. Sarah. I hear the fallout lasts a lifetime." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait for her response. I pressed the red icon to end the call. Then I went into the settings. I scrolled down to her contact. I pressed block caller. I placed the phone face down on the table. The silence returned instantly. It was not empty silence. It was full. It was rich. I picked up my glass of Chianti. The wine was deep red, catching the sunlight like a ruby. I swirled it gently, watching the legs run down the side of the glass. I looked out at the vineyard. The rows of grapes stretched out to the horizon, orderly and beautiful, growing strong in the sun. I took a sip. It tasted like freedom. I was 71 years old. My house was sold. My toxic ties were severed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't building a foundation for someone else. I was just living. And the view was spectacular. I spent a lifetime believing that family was the one structure that could never fail, regardless of the load it carried. I was wrong. I learned that you cannot build a home on the quicksand of entitlement, no matter how much gold you pour into the foundation. True family isn't defined by DNA. It is defined by mutual respect. If you have to pay for their attention, it's not love, it's a transaction. Walking away wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. I finally realized that my value wasn't in what I could provide, but in who I am. It is never too late to stop being a provider and start being a person. If you have ever had to draw a line in the sand to protect your own peace, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.